Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Jessica, and I'm a librarian here at the Chelmsford Library. So tonight, we welcome back Sarah Lohman, and she will tell us the story of ice cream. Let me just open this up. Hey, so Sarah Lohman, in case you haven't attended her presentation so far, is the author of 8 Flavors, The Untold Story of American Cuisine, released in 2016 with Simon & Schuster. 8 Flavors is a #1 bestseller on Amazon, and The Atlantic called the book richly researched, intriguing, and cleverly written. You can get that book through the library. Formerly the curator of food programming at the Lower East Side Tenement Museum, she's lectured at hundreds of universities and institutions nationwide, including the Museum of Science Boston, the American Museum of Natural History, and the New York Public Library. Tonight, she is going to tell us about the history of ice cream. In this presentation, we're going to unearth the stories behind our favorite ice cream treats and share some of the history's wildest bygone flavors that may be due for a revival. By the end of the night, you'll be able to answer questions like, which came first, chocolate or vanilla, the ice cream sandwich or the ice cream cone, Neapolitan or liquid nitrogen? To get us started tonight, if you could just enter the weirdest flavor of ice cream that you have ever tasted into the chat, that would be great. And going forward, if you have any questions for Sarah, she will be stopping at a few times during the program. So enter those as we go into the chat or the Q&A module, and I will send them over to her. Okay, thank you so much, Sarah.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. That's who I am. That's what we're doing tonight. I see pistachio, chili pepper, banana. Ooh, wait. Peconic swamp. What, Nancy, tell me more. Tell me more. Green tea, lobster. Chunky monkey. I'm guessing peanut butter and banana. I love this. Strawberry basil gelato, molasses, ginger. Heck yeah. Oh my goodness. I think the weirdest one that I've tasted is squid ink. I had a squid ink ice cream. It's more for the color, but it has kind of like a salty, savory ocean taste too. You can get it at Chinatown Ice Cream Factory in Manhattan. Oh, toasted piña ice cream. That sounds delicious. See, I love this. Ice cream is this really fascinating, almost neutral palette that we tend to build all these really beautiful and interesting flavors on. And actually, a couple of these that have come up, sauerkraut, I missed that one, Ginny. A couple of these ones that have come up are actually historical flavors. In fact, green tea, even though we associate it more with ice cream from Southeast Asia today, green tea was actually one of the oldest printed recipes for ice cream. Anything that was a beverage was among some of the first things that were frozen in ice cream. And even though I haven't heard of a sauerkraut ice cream before, I have made a historical Parmesan ice cream. Does mochi count as ice cream? Oh, definitely. Well, mochi itself is a sweetened rice paste, and it doesn't have to be, come on words. Sorry, I'm a little bit jet lagged, as I told Jess earlier. So mochi is the sweetened rice paste is what I'm trying to say. And that can stand alone and it can be its old affection. But in, oh yeah, Jess, 2 people have asked, would you, yes, thank you. Like closed captioning, live transcription is on right now. There you go, everybody. Mochi, we usually use that to refer to that sweetened kind of stretchy rice paste that's wrapped around traditional ice cream. So the stuff in the middle is still ice cream. The mochi paste is kind of separate, even though in America we sort of link the two together. Ooh, affogato espresso ice cream sounds great. Shoot, I'm gonna have to go get some ice cream after this. I could tell already that I'm hankering for it. So these flavors, there have been some flavors in the past that are just as wild. Parmesan ice cream is one that I've tried from the 17th century, and that is crazy enough, I would say, as a sauerkraut ice cream too. So Jess already told you what we're gonna do. Oh, Sauerkraut Festival in Waynesville, Ohio. I'm from Cleveland. I'm from Hinckley, which is a little bit south of Cleveland. I didn't know there was a Sauerkraut Festival in Waynesville, Ohio. I've had I don't think I had it, but of course, the garlic festivals. There's one in upstate New York. You're from Parma. Yeah, there are so many Ohioans. We've spread out and taken over the country. Garlic festival in Gilroy or there's one near Woodstock in New York too, and they have garlic ice cream as well. I've not tried it. I love garlic. I've not loved it in any sort of like sweet applications, you know? So We've got a lot to get through. Like Jess said, if you've got questions, I've got my chat open, just stick it in the chat because we're going to be exploring a lot of different types of content today. And we have so much to get through and get in. Jean, are you from near Gilroy? Have you been to the Gilroy Garlic Festival? I've never gone, so it's also at the end of July, which is the garlic harvesting season. And it's, you know, like 100 degrees there. So not very heat tolerant. Okay. So one of the ancestors of ice cream is this sort of slushy, I would almost call it, called sharbati. So sharbat or sharbati is from Persia, modern day Iran. And it is a drink that's made with crushed ice and water, and then sweetened sugar syrup and flavors. So like this one is a rose sharbati. Floral flavors were really popular. You'll see this come up again and again, but historically what we wanted to smell like and what we wanted to taste in our food, we didn't have as defining a line as we do today. So rose water, violet, orange flower water, but also things like musk and ambergris, which are known as animal extracts. We'll get more into ambergris in a moment. That are still used in the perfume industry. These were used as flavorings as well. Sharbati also can have like a citrus juice in it. It can be sort of sweet and sour. It can also have things like grated cucumber or grated watermelon. So it's this really cooling, refreshing textural drink that is still enjoyed by Persian people. And historically, to make this, there would be basically ice factories that in areas of Iran that would get down to below freezing overnight out in the desert. They would take water and they would pour it out into these really, really thin pools so that the water would freeze. And they would collect that in the morning and then like distribute that to like basically street vendors or into wealthy households that are making sharbati. So we've been using ice as a cooling agent for a very long time. Ancient Rome had ice houses as well, and they would use ice to cool wine. And wine would never quite freeze, but it would kind of turn into this wine slushy too. And both in ancient China and Japan, the wealthy would bring down snow from the mountaintops. Well, they wouldn't, their servants would pack it into insulated backpacks and then carry it down to estates. And sometimes that snow would just be displayed. Sometimes you'd put fruit in it. So you had this cooled fruit. And then sometimes it was turned into basically like a snow cone, scoop of snow with like a sweetened flavored syrup poured over top. So that's what came before ice cream, because there needed to be a really big shift to get from something that's like a slushy to frozen. The other sort of ancestral section of ice cream, if we've got like icy things over here, then custardy things are over here. And the tradition of custard desserts primarily comes from Europe. Both France and England were really big on custards in the Middle Ages, but Spain too, think flan, Italy as well. Creme brulee is a great example. So a custard is essentially cooked eggs, milk, and sugar, and maybe cream. And then they were historically baked into pies, a custard pie, and then flavored with a lot of the same ingredients that were being used in charbatis in the Middle East, because they were becoming available to wealthy families through the spice trade. There's a lot of trade back and forth. The spice routes went all the way to Southeast Asia, but for the most part, England was making those trades in the Middle East and also bringing things back like sugar or like these floral flavors like rose water or orange flower water. Fruit could go into these too, but this custard base is another thing that would eventually be frozen into ice cream. Sort of mentioned beverages already. I mentioned those ideas of the flavored charbatis, but a creme brulee is basically a baked ice cream. You can take that same mixture, that egg, milk, sugar mixture, and put it in an ice cream maker and make it into a frozen custard ice cream. And today we refer to that as French vanilla ice cream. The French part is referring to the style of an egg, a ice cream base that's enriched with eggs, okay? So this is our ancestry, our prehistory of ice cream. Here's what changes. So in the 16th century, alchemists, who were essentially chemists of the day, discovered that if you mix in salt or saltpeter, which is sodium nitrate, I do believe, with salt, you create this semi-liquid icy mix that is colder than freezing. Okay, stay with me. So ice, as we should know, is at 32 degrees. That's the freezing temperature of water. And 32 degrees, that is like just like 2 degrees cooler than your refrigerator. So it is not cold enough to actually freeze things. It just keeps things cool, okay? What salt or sodium nitrate do is it inserts itself between the water molecules. So, okay, go back to like middle school chemistry. You know, we've got our states of matter, we've got our gas, we've got our liquid, and then we've got our solid. So what saltpeter is doing is it's getting between those molecules in the solid state. So the ice is still frozen, but it's frozen in a semi-liquid state. So like when we ice the roads in the wintertime, it doesn't actually melt the ice. It's disrupting the solid bond of the molecules in its solid state, okay? So it creates this super cold, usually about 0 degrees Fahrenheit liquid, and that is what is cold enough to freeze ice cream. And what you're looking at are the earliest ice cream makers developed in the 17th century. This discovery was not it was not made for culinary purposes, but was very quickly applied to things like wine and chapati and custards and hot chocolate and green tea and all of these things that we'd had in a liquid state before. And this is the most basic ice cream maker. Ice cream makers in some ways still operate in the same principles. We'll talk about it, but it is a tightly sealed wooden bucket. In the middle is a pewter sorbetier, is what it's called, because it was invented in Italy, but the French kind of the French names are the ones that went into the English-speaking world. And the top of the sorbetier comes off. And so in the middle is where you put your mixture of whatever sorbet or ice cream custard base that you're freezing. You put the top on. And then actually, I think it'd be much better, rather than me trying to explain how this thing freezes ice cream, I'm going to show you a little bit of video from ice cream historian Ivan Day. He's a British ice cream historian, and he really specializes in like late Middle Ages and Renaissance food history, does some really cool stuff. And he is going to show you how this works. Okay, let me get rid of these. I've got it all queued up, and I've got the closed captioning turned on because I know the volume on Zoom can be a little bit quiet, but here is Mr. Ivan Day.
The sorbetier was put into the wooden pail and surrounded with a mixture of ice and salt. The pewter it's made from doesn't get corroded in salty water, so it's perfect for this purpose. This image from the middle of the 19th century shows a very early ice cream machine being used. But what is important to us is the type of freezing table the confectioner is using. Its steep slope allows any leaking salty water to escape away into the pail or bowl below. I am going to use an identical table in my demonstration. We're ready to go. I'm going to make an 18th century strawberry ice cream. I've got all the kit on my freezing table, my sorbetier, which is inside some ice and salt in the freezing pail. The recipe requires a pint of cream, a pint of strawberries, half a pint of stock sugar syrup, and the juice of a lemon. These are all rubbed together through a sieve. It requires no egg and is not cooked. If you want to make it yourself, you will find the recipe on the website. A final layer of ice and salt is put into the pail, and the blended ingredients are poured into the sorbetier. Even in the very early stages, the mixture starts to freeze on the sides of the sorbetier. From time to time, you have to spin the sorbetier around like this. After about 10 minutes, the ice cream starts to set inside the sorbetier, and I'm going to scrape it down off the sides, and then it's possible to start to spin it round really rapidly. What that does, it gets air into the mixture and makes it really light and creamy. I've moved the sorbetier onto a table because the ice cream is now beautifully set. Just look at that, wonderful. And
all right, so never fear, we're going to come back to Ivan Day a little bit later in this talk. Hang on, give me 1 second. There we go. But I think that that is such a great demonstration, rather than me trying to explain it, of how you would use this. So this is how ice cream was made for basically until the middle of the 19th century. So from the mid 1600s until the mid 1800s, this was the tool for making ice cream. Your sorbetier, your pewter sorbetier in a bucket, and then the spattle is the name for the tool that he was using to mix it. So in terms of flavors, one of the earliest ice cream flavors out there was chocolate. The first published ice cream recipes that exist come from a late 17th century Italian confectioner's guide. And one of the original flavors is chocolate, not vanilla. There's chocolate, there's tea, there's coffee, there's fruit flavors, there's no vanilla. Vanilla comes much, much, much later. But chocolate is one of the earliest because in Europe, people were drinking chocolate long before they were consuming vanilla in any capacity. Chocolate came to Europe in the early 17th century. So I know some of you were probably at my chocolate lecture. I just want to say a couple quick things about it for those who haven't. Chocolate is actually indigenous to the Americas. It was prepared as a drink by indigenous Americans starting maybe about 5,000 years ago, new studies are saying, and was potentially first cultivated by the Maya who live in the Yucatan Peninsula about 1,000 to 2,000 years ago. This is what the cacao tree looks like at home. It's got these football fruits hanging right off of it. This is what a lot of tropical fruit trees look like, as opposed to an apple or a pear that has fruit dangling at the end. The fruit tends to come right off the trunks and the big branches. And when you crack that fruit open, there are little like globs of fruit with a big seed in the middle. And that seed is what we make chocolate out of. That's the cocoa bean. There it is, the cocoa bean. It's cacao when it's on the tree. It's cocoa or chocolate after we've processed it. So the fruit and seeds are fermented, then dried, then roasted. And then at that point, the papery outer husk that you can see there is removed. And then that's the chocolate inside. And historically, and today too, it's a slightly different system, but historically the chocolate is ground on a metate that has a small fire underneath. So you grind it with heat to sort of emulsify the oils and the solids. Today, that's done with friction, essentially. The grinder, marble grinders go really, really, really fast and heat the chocolate while it's grinding it. So sort of interestingly, Ivan Day is incredible, again, European historian, and he discovered, he was looking through the journals of a woman named Lady Anne Fanshawe. Lady Anne Fanshawe, her husband was a British diplomat to the Spanish court in the 1650s. And she experienced foods in Spain that she never had before and documented them. So because of her, we've got the first known depiction of a chocolate pot in molinillo, which you can see sort of down here to the left. That's a traditional European pot for making chocolate. A European is a Spanish tool for mixing chocolate. It's associated with Mexico today, but it's a European invention. The indigenous cultures in Mexico would mix chocolate by pouring it between two vessels as opposed to using a molinillo like this. And another amazing thing in her journal/recipe book is the first recorded recipe for ice cream. Now, I mentioned that the first published recipes come from the late 17th century, but Lady Anne Fanshawe's recipe is the earliest written one, which I believe comes from 1656, I think. And the recipe is to make icy cream. So this is not only the first recipe, but it's also in English, so we can read it. And I think what's most interesting about it is what she suggests flavoring ice cream with, because it's not chocolate or vanilla. She says to take 3 pints of the best cream and boil it with a blade of mace. Mace is part of the nutmeg. A nutmeg is a fruit, so there's a fruit part. The nutmeg that we eat is the seed, and between the fruit and the seed, there is this red sort of fibrous membrane, and that is mace. It's not a spice that's used so much in America today, but it is used a lot in the Caribbean and in India. Those are the cuisines within America that you would also find it in, but very popular historically. And she says, or else perfume it with orange flower water. We talked about that with sherbati, or ambergris. Okay, so what is ambergris? Probably the wildest ice cream flavor you have ever heard. This is ambergris, maybe. This is a chunk that was found off of Long Island. It is found on beaches because it actually comes from a sperm whale. So sperm whales eat, wait. No, none of those is the picture I want. Okay. Sperm whales eat squid, and squid beaks are made of the same material as our hair and our fingernails, and the sperm whales can't digest it. And in most sperm whales, they sort of cough it up like a hairball. But in less than 5% of male sperm whales, the squid beaks form an impaction in their bowels, okay? And then that impaction gets irritated and it's covered with like mucus and fecal matter. And then we don't know what happens. We don't know if the sperm whales pass it and it like goes out the back end, or if it actually creates a rupture in their intestines and kills them. We have no idea. What we do know is then these like greasy, waxy balls of squid beaks and other sperm whale bodily material float around in the ocean. And the longer they float around in the salt water, in the sun, they cure. So this is, these are 3 grades of ambergris or ambergris. That word comes from the French. The fresh is really quite black and waxy and is sort of more aggressively fecal, I would say. And then like the middle grade is gray ambergris, which has been curing for some time. And then white is the highest grade. So this has been, so ambergris has been used in the perfume industry and is still used in the perfume industry in Europe. It's technically illegal in the United States under the Endangered Species Act to protect sperm whales. But it is, and that is because they don't want to encourage the hunting of sperm whales, but both traditionally and contemporarily, ambergris is found. There are professional ambergris hunters that look on beaches where the currents tend to bring these floating, they can be big like that woman had, they can be very, very small after they're cured, and people are trained to look for them and sell them. But historically, this was one of the most popular ice cream flavors, and that's because it was a very expensive ingredient. One of the things that we really haven't addressed yet is that ice cream for a very long time, really into the 19th century, was only for the very, very wealthy because it needed expensive ingredients, things like fresh milk and heavy cream, things like sugar, which really wasn't widely available until the 19th century, and ice, something that obviously when you want to eat ice cream in the summertime, you have to pay for the ice too, and that was something else that only wealthy people could afford. So those same people then also wanted to make ice cream with extremely expensive ingredients, which both historically and today, ambergris was a very expensive ingredient. The market price varies, obviously, but the last time I checked, ambergris was more expensive per ounce than gold within the contemporary market. So that is ambergris ice cream. I have made it. And that is what Lady Anne Fanshaw's like original ice cream recipe recommended. Mace, orange flower water, or this blob of goo from inside a sperm whale that's been floating in the ocean. Very, very popular early ice cream flavor. Orange flower water and rose water were really the sort of vanilla of its day. And by of its day, I mean they were very popular in the 18th century. And that's because vanilla largely wasn't available. Orange flower water was more popular in Europe. Rose flower water is more popular in America. And that just depends on like, it was harder. In early American colonial days, the European Americans weren't living in an environment in which they could grow orange trees to get the orange blossoms, but they could grow rose bushes. Whereas in Europe, the Seville orange blossoms were coming from the Mediterranean, Eastern Europe, and from the Middle East as well. So floral flavors were really, really big in ice cream for the first 200 years or so. There's a Seville orange tree, which this spring I walked through a greenhouse that had orange trees in stock, and it was just like this heavenly perfume, and I got a real sense of what it'd be like to, ooh, I should make ice cream from those fresh blossoms. The flower waters are byproducts of the distilling process, essentially for making rose oil. They collect the water that's distilled out, and then that is what's used basically like a vanilla extract historically. And the damask rose is what rose water is made from. This is grown primarily in Eastern Europe, but also can be grown here in America too, which is why rose water was more popular here. So when do we get vanilla ice cream? Well, let me tell you a little bit about vanilla. So this is the earliest ice cream recipe we have in America. And this is actually a recipe that Thomas Jefferson documented. Oh, Rachel asked a great question. Hold on, let me take a sip of water. Then we'll get back to vanilla. Okay, so the flavor, I've had it twice, and the flavor can really, really vary. Oh, I'm going to recommend this. So for those of you foodies out there, and I know you are, there's a great podcast called Gastropod. And if you look up the ice cream recipe, I am on it, and the host and I make ambergris ice cream together, and she loves it and I hate it. Spoiler alert. But the ambergris ice cream we made had mossy flavors, but also sort of barnyard flavors. It's the ambergris itself smelled very fecal. Hold on, I'm going to backtrack since we're talking about other things right now. Yeah, sheep, like how sheep smell. I'm not selling it, but like I've never really smelled or tasted really high grade ambergris, which is supposed to be absolutely heavenly. I'm not going to tell you where to buy it because that's illegal. And rose water is not just rose petal soaked in water. It can be. You can kind of make a rose water substitute where you don't just soak it, but you would heat really odorous rose petals. But it's actually a made from the distilling process. The distilling process was also created in the Middle East and specifically in ancient Persia. It is a byproduct of making rose oil. So basically you thanks, Jess. And the ice cream episode is what you're going to look for. You would soak rose petals and water in the big basin of the still. And then you heat it, and then water evaporates out, and that's your rose water, and then rose oil is left behind. And that's like a more intense aroma that was used for perfume, essentially. So you can make your own rose water, or you can absolutely buy it. You can get it online. You can get it in any grocery store that sells products from the Middle East or India primarily is where you're going to find it. Okay, vanilla. I think I got everything. This is Thomas Jefferson's vanilla ice cream recipe. He didn't invent it. He documented it either when he was living as the American ambassador to France, or he may have written it down as it was told to him from his chef, James Hebbings, who was a Black enslaved man that Jefferson took with him to France and had him trained as a French culinarian, as he had him go to courses to become a professional French chef and pâtissier. Hebbings was literate, incredibly talented, and was able to negotiate for his freedom. But it's also a sad story too, and one that I cover in my book, 8 Flavors. So if you want to know more about him, you should absolutely read it. But this is a recipe for vanilla ice cream, which was very popular in France when Jefferson was the ambassador there right around the turn of the 19th century. It was like 1801, 1802. It was 1790s, right around the turn of the 19th century. And he brought back, at least we have remaining 11 different recipes that Jefferson took down. And we know were made in his home as well, because some of his guests documented eating ice cream at Monticello or in the White House in their own journals too. So this is also the first, now there's a couple published recipes for vanilla that come from the middle of the 18th century. This is the first American recipe for ice cream, period. Much like, and this is the first printed recipe in America. It's from 1824. It's from the Virginia Housewife, which is a really early American cookbook, and has the first ice cream recipes. There's vanilla, there's coconut, there's strawberry, and there's also an oyster ice cream too, which I've made, and it's basically like a cold soup, I would call it. So this is what vanilla looks like when it's at home. It's actually an orchid, a pale white or yellow orchid. And it is also from Central America. It's indigenous to the United States. There are vanilla orchids all over the planet. However, only originally the ones that produce an odorous and flavorful fruit only come from Central America. Now, in the present, vanilla is grown basically all around the equator, all around the world. So this is what a vanilla plantation looks like. It is a climbing vine. It can look like this, rather orderly, or it can be out in the forest climbing up. A lot of farmers who grow it will grow it alongside orange trees. And so they can train up the orange tree. They've got oranges to sell and vanilla to sell. When that flower is fertilized, it ripens into this green bean that then will get a little bit of red or yellow at the tip and then splits when it's really ripe. Yeah, there's vanilla orchid right there. This one is rather large. They can be kind of small. There's 24 different vanilla orchid varieties that are edible, but we only tend to eat like 3 of them. Mostly, and this is, you know what? It's all in my book, And it's only after an extensive curing process that involves sun drying do we get the like dark, wrinkled, oily, really delicious smelling and tasting vanilla bean. It has to do with breaking down the cell walls, different chemicals coming together and linking up, but neither the orchid nor the green fruit, the ripe fruit, smell like vanilla. That only happens after this curing process. And sometimes when you've got really well-cured vanilla, you can actually get crystals of what's called vanillin on it. And although there are over 200 different taste and flavor chemicals that make up the experience of a vanilla bean, vanillin accounts for more than 70% of our taste and smell experience with vanilla. So vanilla at first comes to Europe actually with chocolate. So we're talking like early 17th century, because for the indigenous people of the Americas, it was traditionally used as a flavoring with chocolate. And actually that's true too. If you've baked a chocolate cake, you usually put a little bit of vanilla in there. Most chocolate bars we eat also have a little bit of vanilla in there. Vanilla is what's known as a flavor potentiator, which means it kind of like lifts up and extends your experience with other flavors, in particular chocolate. And we don't really know when vanilla started to be used on its own, but I suspect it happened sometime in the early 18th century. Thanks, Jess. You can get 8 flavors to your library. And it probably happened in France because the French loved vanilla really more than any other European country. The problem was that the vanilla growing regions were controlled by Spain. And when people would try to transplant vanilla orchids to different parts of the world, like the French-owned colony of Madagascar, the plants would flower, but they wouldn't fruit and turn into those vanilla beans. So you're probably familiar with vanilla from Madagascar, but the vanilla industry in this part of the world actually originates on a much tinier island called Réunion. Réunion used to be known as Ile de Bourbon, and you've probably also heard of bourbon vanilla. Bourbon vanilla refers to vanilla that comes from one of these 3 islands, actually 4. Réunion, Mauritius, Seychelles, or Madagascar. That's what bourbon vanilla is. So on the little island of Réunion, there was a plantation master named Feriot Bellier Beaumont. He was a slave owner, and one of the enslaved children that he owned, hold on, I'm going to show you his name, was named Edmund. He eventually will take on the last name Albius when he is freed. Now, when Edmund is about 11 years old, Feriot Beaumont sort of takes him under his wing, and Beaumont is really interested in botany. He has a collection of odd plants, including a vanilla vine. He shows Edmund the problem that the flowers, the vine flowers but doesn't fruit. And Edmund on his own discovers the technique of hand pollinating vanilla flowers that is still used around the world to this day. Within Edmund's lifetime, the whole industry of Réunion is changed from sugarcane plantations to vanilla plantations. And a lot of people are made extremely wealthy by his discovery. Although he is successfully credited with this discovery, and we remember his name, he didn't see a penny from, even though he made a lot of other people rich, no one took care of him. And unfortunately, he died in poverty. Another really sad story that I go into a little bit deeper in my book, but you can see how much ice cream history is also tied into Black history too, which I find really fascinating. The technique for hand pollination has to do with taking basically a small stick, and in the vanilla orchid, the male and female parts of the flower are separated. So basically you have to push back a membrane between the two and then smash them together. And that process is called the marriage. And then after the marriage, the flower is pollinated and then the fruit, then it begins to fruit. In Mexico, there are native pollinators that basically do this. But even in Mexico today, this technique is used because you get a much higher pollination rate and therefore more product per acre as well. This is all the places where vanilla is grown today, even though it's only indigenous to Central America. All of the dots show places that have a thriving vanilla industry too. Although I think more than 80% of vanilla comes from Madagascar. You might have noticed too, it's very expensive right now. Madagascar has had some really terrible typhoons, and a lot of the vanilla crop has been destroyed. So it's interesting too, because it might start to bring back the vanilla industry to places like Mexico. So we've talked a bit about flavors. Let's talk a little bit about ice. So I mentioned already that up until the 19th century, ice was only available to the very, very wealthy. But then in the first half of the 19th century, an entrepreneur out of Boston realized that he could just harvest ice from local lakes and sell it. And not only did he sell it all up and down the East Coast, but he was such a good advertiser that he made the world believe that his ice from Massachusetts lakes was the cleanest, purest, most delicious ice in the world. And so he sold ice. He began by selling to hot regions. He would sell ice down to the Caribbean. He would insulate ships and ship ice to India. But he also sold ice to cold places like the Queen of England loved to buy his ice too. And one of the things that shaped the ice industry as well is to cut the ice, a blade used to have to be operated by hand. Essentially, you had to hand saw ice out of lakes. And in the early 19th century, someone invented a blade that could be dragged behind horses, which is what you see happening here. So that made the process a lot easier to navigate. Ice was then stored in ice houses all up and down the East Coast, and was stored so well that in one story I read, New York City had ice all the way until the following October. So it would last all through the summer season. The price came down, which meant that it was sort of an affordable luxury for anyone who wanted it. And ice cream also became an affordable luxury. At almost the same time, the modern ice cream maker was invented. It was meant in the 1840s by a woman named Nancy, and I never remember her last name because it's like Nancy Jones, or it's just like such a basic last name. Anyway, I should, because, you know, she's this incredible inventor. She basically took something that had to be done by hand by servants or the enslaved, and she mechanized it. So someone still has to sit there and like turn the side, but this ice cream made in this way froze faster and was fluffier because it had more air beaten into it too. It had a better texture. Basically, this, you can still see what is the sorbetier in the middle. You can see where you would pack ice and salt around the edges, and then the spattle is in the middle. And so this is essentially what an ice cream maker still looks like. It's just now electric. And you plug it in and push a button and the whole thing turns by itself. You don't have to crank it anymore. So this is what I mean, like the basic principles of ice cream making have not changed in several hundred years. So the ease of making ice cream and of accessing ice and also of accessing sugar too, which has come down in price, again, honestly, because of slavery. Nancy Johnson. Thank you, Catherine. Let's call out a female inventor of the 1840s, an incredible entrepreneur from Pennsylvania, Nancy Johnson. Thanks, Catherine. So we see more ice cream sold commercially by the early 19th century, especially in cities along the along the East Coast. And ice cream parlors become popular. Well, here's a little bit of a hint. Originally, they were called ice cream saloons. So they offered an alternative to bars that in particular women and children could go into, because for the most part, outside of German beer halls, it was not considered socially acceptable for women to drink in the 19th century. And there were really very few public spaces it was considered acceptable for women to be in, especially middle class on up women. But that wasn't true in ice cream parlors. Not only could you go there with your kids, you could also just go there with your girlfriends, which again, there wasn't a space for that. Most women were sort of forced by the rules of the time to stay at home. And this was also a place where you could go on dates unchaperoned. Most dating took place also in the home, in the parlor of your home, essentially the living room. And you would be chaperoned by one of your parents or your grandmother or something. This was a place that was permissible where you could go as a couple. So there was a little bit of like women's liberation and sexual liberation tied to these ice cream parlors that made them very, very successful. Another popular way of consuming ice cream in the 19th century was if you were having a dinner party, you would order a molded ice cream from a confectioner. And these molds were really extraordinary. You can see, this is a page from a book I'm going to show you a little bit later on. There is, it's harder to see. All right, so we've got this beautiful bouquet of flowers. There is an asparagus. There's a pineapple. There's a fish on a plate. There's like a chicken that's sitting in a basket here. So these would have different colors. And there was a lot of ones that would try to trick your eye. They especially loved meat. Do I have the roast chicken one? Well, this is what one of the basket of flour one, actually, you can see right there. That is what that looks like when it's depicted in ice cream form. Roast chicken molds are really popular. This is a peach, another really popular one too, that you think you'd be serving. The goal was to make it look so realistic that the person you served it to would think it was actually half a peach. There's the chicken. I thought it was in here. Roast chicken ones that you'd make from like chocolate ice cream usually and make it look like a meaty chicken plate. So these molds are all also done by Ivan Day. And so we're going to go back and revisit that video. And he is going to show you, he's got a smaller pineapple mold, but he's basically going to make a pineapple ice cream, which I think is just so cool to see.
These ices were moulded into novelty shapes. This 18th century engraving depicts a number, including some to make ice creams in the guise of asparagus, truffles, and crayfish. These are moulded asparagus ices. In certain atmospheric conditions, a rime frost forms on the demoulded ices, as on this sorbet basket of flowers. This phenomenon is particularly effective on this swan, as it resembles the bird's soft downy feathers. Behind the swan is a pineapple made of water ice. I'm going to show you how to make a very similar one. 18th century ice cream moulds, like the pineapple I showed you earlier, are very rare. This one dates from the 19th century. Throughout Europe, the pineapple was a highly prized exotic fruit, but if you really wanted to impress your guests, why not ornament your table with one made from ice cream in a mould like this? To keep the mould cold, it is placed on a napkin over a tray of ice and salt. Semi-frozen water ice is worked into the mould with a spoon, and the mould is closed and topped up. It is then wrapped in brown paper and immersed in a pail full of salted ice until frozen, which takes about 3 hours. A big moment has arrived. I'm now going to demould the pineapple, which you can see is still wrapped up in brown paper, which stops the ice from sticking to it. I'm going to dip it into this bowl of really cold water. If you use hot water, it will be a disaster. The mould is immersed for about 10 seconds and carefully opened to reveal the frozen treat. During the course of the early 19th century, moulded ices became ever more popular.
I mean, how cool is that? I've seen it too, where the molds don't have a top and you would save the leaves from an actual pineapple and stick it in the top to make it look even more realistic. But the one that really blew my mind was the asparagus that he showed. Like, it looks so real. So I am going to put the link to this in the chat. I see some great questions, and now is a wonderful time to ask any other questions if you have it too. There is the link to the whole video, which is about 20 minutes long. So if you'd like to revisit it, after the talk. So it was used for the coloring. So sometimes the coloring is natural just because of like what is going into it, you know, so like it could be, it's usually like a pineapple water ice that would be going in there. Or, you know, you can tell that this little raspberry tart down here was probably made with a dark raspberry fruit. So it could just be coming from the flavoring, but they would use natural colorings to dye the ice cream to look different colors. In particular, like the green ones, they would use like a spinach juice to dye it, or they could use like annatto or cochineal to do like some of the red and pink colors as well, or like blueberry juice or raspberry juice. So definitely the confectioner's books, especially by the 19th century, are extremely detailed on how to create these illusions. And this is something that you would, I just dropped the video link into the chat. It does say they went to hosts and panelists, but I bet Jess could send it out again too. Oh, excuse me. That is why hosts and panelists, when it needs to go to everyone. Hang on. There we go. Just put it in. I put it in. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you for the heads up. So yeah, this was something that you would buy for your dinner party, would get delivered in a freezer, which is like an insulated box, and then you would serve as like the grand centerpiece to your very, very fancy dinner. And some of them you can see were abstract too, just like beautiful abstract towers of things and like all these cute little ones and this crown. It's just so neat. So of course, we might be more familiar though with just getting ice cream from the ice cream man, right? Getting it off of the streets. If we're not going to an ice cream parlor or ice cream shop, we're buying it from the truck, plays music, comes by. Ice cream vendors started popping up in New York City around the same time the ice cream industry exploded. This is from a book called Street Cries of the City, which is available on Google Books. And it's just this really cool, it's a kid's book from the 1840s, I believe, and it features these drawings of street vendors that are seen in New York, and then like a poem about them that usually includes like what their vendor cry would be. So it's an incredible reference for food historians because we know what food was being sold, what people looked like, what their equipment looked like. So at this point, you would already have a commercial ice cream maker. And in all likelihood, this street vendor was buying ice cream from a central confectioner and then going out to the streets and selling it himself. But you can see that he's using an old school sorbetier as a storage vessel for the ice cream to keep it cold too. So in all major cities, there would be ice creams, and they usually sell their ice cream out of these little glass cones called penny licks. Here's a depiction from New York City of an Italian man selling ice cream. By the end of the 19th century, Italian street vended ice cream was associated with Italian immigrants, which makes some sense because ice cream, as we know it, sort of originated in Italian culture. But the penny licks, the thing about them is because there were these glass containers, you had to, like this little child is doing, either use your fingers to get the ice cream out or like lick it. And then you have to stand there because you have to give it back to the ice cream vendor when you're done. And then he would sort of dip it in some water and wash it out and fill it up with ice cream for the next person. So didn't have a good handle on sanitation at that point. So ice cream vendors were blamed for the spread of disease a lot of times that they weren't necessarily at fault for. That was just a thing that we did with immigrants 100 years ago, and in some ways today. But various diseases were associated with different immigrant groups, and it was thought that these people brought these diseases as opposed to like the living or working conditions they were in were causing them, right? So more than the fact that penny licks were spreading communicable diseases, the vendors wanted to figure out like an edible container for people because they could sell more ice cream if people could walk away and they didn't need to wait for the little glass thing to come back. So the first thing that people came up with was paper wrapped ice cream bars. And again, because these were normally associated with Italian vendors, they were often referred to as Neapolitan ice cream. The ice cream was made with a kind of, it usually have like, come on brain, a substance in it that would firm it up, like gelatin or carrageenan, something that would make it really firm and sliceable. And usually the Neapolitan ice cream was made in 3 colors, originally strawberry, pistachio, and vanilla to mimic the colors of the Italian flag. Today, it's usually chocolate, strawberry, and vanilla. It was sometimes called hokey pokey, but like I said, since many of these vendors were Italian and ice cream, the tradition of ice cream was associated with Naples, it was also called Neapolitan ice cream. So now you know why. And that it should have pistachio in it, which someone mentioned as an unusual flavor earlier on. And then the next thing people began to turn to are like wafer cookie sandwiches. So a wafer is like a pizzelle cookie, right? Or these rolled ones are like those delicious pirouette cookies you get with the hazelnut chocolate cream in the middle. Wafers have been around since ancient Rome. And historically, I mean, it took a really long time for us to put ice cream in them, honestly. You would either eat them as is, as they're depicted in the picture, or if they were rolled into cones, they would be filled with candy or fruit or whipped cream or hold party favors. It wasn't until the end of the 19th century that people started using them to hold those bricks of ice cream like hokey pokey or Neapolitan. And then we expanded to other ice creams. In this image, which I believe is from Coney Island, you can see that there is a 1-cent ice cream vendor of ice cream sandwiches back there. Other early cookies used were like Nilla wafers, and ladyfingers were also very popular. Usually the cookies were put into a mold, the ice cream was put on top of that, another cookie, you froze it and you broke it apart and sold it. And yeah, ice cream costs 1 cent all the way through. Wafers are really tasty, and I've never had a wafer ice cream sandwich, but I bet it'd be really good. I bet a Nilla, like a little Nilla wafer ice cream sandwich, would also be delicious too. They were 1 cent from basically like the 1880s to the 1920s, and they were universally delicious. So it became this food by the late 19th century that was a class uniting food. There's this great quote I read of like an ice cream sandwich vendor down on Wall Street, and like the little like newspaper boys were buying ice cream for 1 cent, and like the Wall Street moguls were buying ice cream sandwiches for 1 cent, and they were all like standing in line together. So the sandwich develops out of this need for like a portable ice cream sandwich, and then but it's also affordable and delicious, and everybody loves it. You can see there's a little boy eating one, and then like maybe his older brother, and then like all of these like happening young dudes, and then these poor women in their wool bathing costumes. Ice cream cones, officially 1880s. This is a depiction of an ice cream parlor from the 1830s that another food historian discovered. And he thinks that this woman in the bottom corner here might be eating like ice cream from a cornet. Looking at this now, I actually think that this might be like a penny lick, kind of a fancy penny lick. So I don't know, but perhaps this is the first depiction of an ice cream cone. The first confirmed ice cream cone sighting is from the 1886 book, I believe, 1880s book of Agnes Marshall. Agnes Marshall was an ice cream genius. She published 2 books devoted to ice cream, both making fancy molds, making fascinating flavors, and she is the first person that says in writing that you can use rolled up wafers to hold ice cream. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking. The popular legend, there she is, there's Agnes Marshall, is that ice cream cones were invented at the 1904 World's Fair. Not true. This predates that by 25 years, essentially. I will say, though, that ice cream cones got popular after the World's Fair. And that's something we see with a lot of different food products, because the World's Fairs were like the Instagrams of today. It was a place where everyone was coming together and seeing and then also trying these new and different foods. And then people are coming from all over the country to one central location, and then they go back home and they want those same foods again. So definitely ice cream is being served in cones at the World's Fair. There are a lot of stories about who and how and when. And right after the World's Fair, the first commercial ice cream factory is founded. So popularized it and also commercialized it, as opposed to like a treat that you just be making at home, right? Or maybe getting special from a confectioner. Now ice cream cones are being sold out to confectioners for people to serve ice cream in. Excuse me 1 minute, I'm just getting a sip of water. So still a pivotal moment, but it's Agnes who invents it. Another cool thing that she suggested was freezing ice cream using, this is one of her books. This one's available on Google Books. It's really, really cool to flip through. You might get some inspiration for what kind of ice cream you want to make this summer if you have an ice cream maker. She suggested freezing ice cream with what she called liquid oxygen, but it's actually liquid nitrogen. She apparently went to like a lecture that demoed liquid nitrogen. You know, it's gaseous, you pour it on things, they freeze, you shatter them. And she said, wouldn't it be cool to do this at a dinner party where people have the ingredients for ice cream in front of them, and then the server comes and pours liquid nitrogen on top of it, and then they mix it together and have their own ice cream. She came up with this in 1914, and no one actually did it until the 1980s, which is pretty incredible. Oh, great. Jess just put the link to her book. It's just like there's savory ice creams in there. It's so fun to look through. So she came up with this long before other people were. This is one of the signatures of like the modernist cuisine movement that started in the 80s and really lasted through the 2010s. And several restaurants in the 21st century would do exactly that, make the ice cream tableside. Not only does it look cool that you're getting this instant ice cream, but also one of the things that makes ice cream have a very smooth mouthfeel is very small ice crystals. And the faster ice cream freezes, the smaller the ice crystals. So although liquid nitrogen isn't as like fluffy as traditional made ice cream, it has this very smooth and rich mouthfeel because it freezes so quickly. There's her other book, which might be online now, but originally had to go to the New York Public Library and look at it in person. It's just cool. She's just a cool lady. I love her. So just some flavors to inspire you. We started with unusual flavors. Here are some perhaps unusual, but very popular flavors from ice cream history. I sort of pulled these at random through all the text that I was looking through. So we've got almond, typical, saffron, honey and citron. Citron is a citrus fruit. You might know it from fruitcake. You might know it from succote. It's an etrog. Violet, ambergris, as we know. Laurel leaves are bay leaves. Tarragon, celery. I've not made celery ice cream. That would be an interesting one to try. Crumble cookies, but in the 17th century, they didn't like textural ice cream. So they would soak something like almond cookies in the ice cream and then strain the cookies out. So you had just cookie flavor, but no actual cookie pieces. Textural ice cream doesn't really become popular till the 19th century. Ditto with brown bread, a really, really, really popular 18th century flavor. You soak the brown bread and then you strain it out. Pine nuts. Someone mentioned a pine nut ice cream. I forgot that was on this list. So that's a total callback, a piña ice cream, or pine nuts. That's a callback to a popular 18th century flavor. Verjuice is unripe grape juice. So it's kind of tart and tangy. Truffle is in the mushroom. Haven't made that one either. Also, I haven't made artichoke, pistachio, and candied orange, even wilder than pistachio ice cream. Pineapple, of course. Chocolate, clove, vanilla, and lemon ice cream. Vanilla and cinnamon. I have made a lemon cinnamon bay leaf ice cream that was really pretty incredible. That one is on my blog, so that would actually come up just if you Googled it. Really, really, really tasty. Brown bread, pomegranate, jasmine, fennel, elderflowers, those floral flavors still prevailing to the 18th century. Excuse me. By the 19th century, we get more of like the flavors we're used to today, but still we have curacao, which is a liqueur, an orange liqueur, and orange flower water. We have fig, burnt almond, which is a caramel and toasted almond ice cream. There it is, cinnamon, lemon zest, and bay leaf. Ratafia, another alcohol. Biscuit tortoni, which is amaretto and almond cookie. And by the 19th century, the cookies get to stay in there. And I love almond flavored things, so I think I would love that one. Yes, there will be a link with the recording sent out. Now is a great time to ask any last questions in the chat if you have them. While my book 8 Flavors isn't solely about ice cream, I do talk about ice cream, in particular the vanilla chapter. So if you liked this talk, you can get my book anywhere books are sold and from your local library as well. Also, if you're on social media, Facebook or Instagram, you can look me up either by my name, Sarah Lohman, or by my handle @4poundsflour. And if you go to my website, oh, Catherine, thank you. Was there tomato ice cream? That's a great question. And I don't know the answer. I'm going to look it up for you now. I'm really curious. I'm curious what the acid, because there's so much balancing of chemistry when you're making ice cream. So I'm curious what the acid of the tomatoes would do. Any machines or that you'd recommend? I like the Cuisinart. Ooh, okay. Wait, this good stuff coming in. I like the Cuisinart. Okay, there's basically 2 levels of ice cream machines. One has a bucket that has to be stored in your freezer because it has like a juice inside the walls of it that needs to freeze. I like that one. It's like a couple $100 cheaper than the alternative, which I'll get to. And basically, whenever I make ice cream, I just then put the ice cream in a storage vessel, immediately wash out the barrel and put it back in the freezer. So it's always ready to go. The next, that one will be under $100. You can even, the one I like is discontinued, but you can find that at eBay for like $40. I don't know the make and model off the top of my head. I'm sorry. But like the basic at-home Cuisinart ice cream maker is about $80 and I love it. The next one up is about $300 and that one has a freezing system in it. So it's basically like a prosumer version. So like it's still pretty small and can fit at home. But I've used it for like, if I've had to make specialty ice cream for events, like the barrel one, you can use it like once every 48 hours, the one with the freezer, and you can continuously use it. But both of those are really like the Cuisinart model. Are you familiar with the first documented ice cream sundae from the Ithaca Daily Journal, April 5th, 1882? I am not familiar with that incident or that article. If you've got a link, I'd love to see it. There is a lot of debates, honestly, much like with the ice cream cone thing, where it's attributed as one thing, it's actually other. we don't really know where the first ice cream sundae was created and how it was coined. Also, because there's a lot of questions of like, what makes a sundae? Is this a sundae? Is this a sundae? Wasn't it a sundae till it got the name? There are a lot of, although we're able to date quite a few different things within ice cream history, which is unusual. When we start getting to ice cream parlor history, probably because it's like a commercialization and everyone wants to lay claim to be the first blank, there are a lot of conflicting stories and basically no way to confirm anyone. And also, you know, let people have their fame. Who cares? I bet it's all delicious. Thank you. I have visited Ithaca. And I'm not going to say that Ithaca did invent the sundae. I don't know. No one knows. Don't come at me. Milkshakes versus frappe. Oh my God. I mean, frappe, that would be an interesting one to look into. Milkshakes come out of soda fountain culture, which starts in the 1880s and 1890s and becomes popular during Prohibition. So that's where milkshakes come from. I mean, I hadn't heard the word frappe until the past 10 or 15 years, coming out of like Starbucks associated things. So I would be curious to see if that's has actual Italian origins or is kind of an Italianese thing we made up. Nobody comments about the new keto ice creams. I do. You might not want to hear them. Actually, okay, let me tell you two things about diet ice cream. Listen up. So not keto for a second, but when you buy diet or low-fat ice cream, it is the same ice cream as regular non-diet ice cream, but more air is whipped into it. So you are getting less ice cream by weight, and that's why it's diet ice cream. So, and keto ice cream, I think is probably good if you don't remember what ice cream tastes like anymore. And I think that it is in some ways problematic that because when I talk to people, they're like, well, I can devour like a whole pint of it. Yeah, but like, I can eat I don't want to eat a whole pint of something bad. I want to have a cup of something really delicious. So when it comes to diet, trendy ice creams, I say go get the real stuff. It should be a treat. It should be a luxury. And it's going to be more satisfying to get really, really, really good ice cream and you'll eat less of it. So don't go diet with ice cream. Don't go keto. Get the good stuff.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Yes, like baking with real butter, Gail says. Yes.
If you're going to bake a cake, like go for it. Have less cake. Have less of the good stuff than making like a grim stand-in. Alternate milks. Oh, okay. Let me get to this, Jess, and then we'll stop.
No, absolutely. So, no, take your time.
The best, interesting. Frappes have ice cream, milkshakes don't. I've never had a milkshake that doesn't have ice cream in it. I'm curious, and Diana's like, everyone agree? Okay, alternate milks. If we're talking vegan ice cream, coconut milk is the absolute best. And here's why. The texture of ice cream has as much to do with the balance of fat to liquids and solids as it does anything else. So dairy milk is most commonly used, milk plus a combination of cream, because you create the correct ratio of fat to solids and liquids to make a delicious mouthfeel ice cream. Coconut milk, especially if you get the cans of coconut milk that are a little higher in fat, usually like a Thai brand, has a perfect ratio right out of the can. Now you have to like the flavor of coconut because it will have a little bit of coconut flavor even if you put other things in, but that is what I recommend both at home and when you're going out. Other alternate milks and ice cream like soy or almond, they don't naturally have enough fat to make a good tasting ice cream. So that means that whoever's making it has to play around with things like emulsifiers, usually not gelatin, but something like carrageenan, which is kind of like a vegan gelatin that comes from seaweed. And there's nothing bad or poisonous about emulsifiers or gelatins or anything like that replicate the thickness. It's just like there is a non-milk product that is perfect and creates wonderful ice cream that you don't have to science up. And I think so whenever if I eat a non-dairy ice cream, I always go for the coconut because it's always the tastiest and the richest. Lactose-free milk and ice cream. I've never done it. I would, honestly, I would give it a Google. I think that's really an interesting question. The thing is, you have to have that fat. It doesn't have to be dairy fat though. So usually you mix milk and cream, but you can mix like milk and olive oil. So yeah, it's the fat percentage. Look, here's the thing. I talked at the beginning about this, how ice cream is sort of like this neutral base. Find an ice cream recipe you like, and then you can build on it and change it in any way. It's a chemical equation to create delicious ice cream. So, you try some lactose-free ice cream recipes and find the one that texturally is the best for you. And then you can change the flavor and do this and that and the other. I was going to say, if any of you are local to New York, I'm teaching an ice cream making class in July, but unfortunately it's in person and not online. So I'm sorry. Maybe I'll try to do an online one so that people can see. Chocolate syrup, sprinkles, and jimmies, that is very much, I can't speak to it very specifically, but it's very much a part of the soda fountain, 1880s to 1920s era. Soy-based ice cream. It's not the same texture as very dairy-based, very tasty. Yeah, there's nothing wrong. Honestly, there's nothing wrong with it. I don't judge the tools that we use to make delicious foods. But to me, I like coconut because it's like creamy and good right out of the can. Whereas with soy, you have to do a lot of other things to create that texture. And it never quite even it's the same. There's not enough fat. It never quite matches the same thing. But I like a really rich, full fat ice cream, and not everybody likes that. So maybe like a soy or an oat is a little bit more suited to your taste too. Okay, this was fun. Have an amazing summer. Yeah, that's why I love studying ice cream. It is complex and interesting. And we didn't even get to half of the women's history and Black history that's involved. Maybe I'll write a book about it someday. I'm thinking about it. And so then I'll be back, virtual cookathon. I'll be back in a month, and we're going to talk cocktails, which is super fun too.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks for going a little extra and answering all these questions. And you've got lots of accolades in the chat, and we can't wait for the next one.
I'm going to go get some ice cream. How about you?
Absolutely. Good night, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good night, Jess. Thanks.
Bye.